What happens when you pour wine on someone who controls $3.5 billion in contracts? The room laughed. The cameras flashed. Everyone thought they'd just witnessed a humiliation. But what they actually witnessed was the beginning of a corporate execution so swift, so surgical, that by the time the crimson wine splashed against the marble floor, a 100-year empire was already bleeding billions. A billionaire's sister mistook composure for submission. One glass, one phone call, one woman who refused to accept that her dignity was negotiable. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just made the kind of call that reminds the world, underestimate the quiet ones at your own cost. Before we go any further, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The ballroom glittered with wealth and arrogance, where every handshake was a power play and every smile hid a calculation. Among the elite stood Dr. Chen, the brilliant CEO who had just closed a historic $3.5 billion deal. But in a room built on old money and older prejudices, her success made her a target. When a glass of wine became a weapon of contempt, no one expected what happened next. In less than 5 minutes, a corporate empire would begin its fall, and the world would learn a simple truth. Underestimate the quiet ones at your own cost. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the Grand Meridian Ballroom cast prismatic reflections across a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Each beam of light seemed to dance with deliberate elegance, illuminating faces that cost fortunes to maintain and smiles that hid calculated intentions. The air was thick with the mingled scents of French perfume, aged whiskey, and the particular musk of old money, a fragrance that couldn't be bought, only inherited. Tonight was no ordinary gathering. This was the annual Harrington Empire Gala, held at the historic Roosevelt Estate in Newport, where America's wealthiest families came to see and be seen. The marble floors, imported from Carrara in the 1920s, gleamed beneath the feet of tech moguls, oil tycoons, and political powerhouses. Waiters in crisp white gloves glided between clusters of guests, offering champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every laugh, a strategic alliance. At precisely 8:47 p.m., the room's energy shifted. Dr. Chen stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, her silhouette framed by the moonlit water beyond. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her frame with understated elegance, no excessive jewelry, no desperate attempts to fit in. She didn't need to. At 36 years old, she was the youngest woman to ever lead a Fortune 500 technology company, and tonight, she had just accomplished what many deemed impossible. Chen Technologies had secured a $3.5 billion partnership with the Harrington Empire, a conglomerate so vast and so entrenched in American industry that doing business with them was considered the ultimate validation. The deal had taken 18 months of negotiations, countless presentations, and more skepticism than Maya cared to remember. But she had delivered. The contracts were signed. The press releases were drafted. By tomorrow morning, every major financial publication would be running her story. "Quite a view, isn't it?" came a voice beside her. Maya turned to see Thomas Harrington himself, the 72-year-old patriarch whose business instincts had turned his grandfather's railroad fortune into a modern empire spanning technology, real estate, and media. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile warm but measured. "It is," Maya replied, her voice calm and assured. Though I imagine you've seen it many times. Indeed, Thomas chuckled. But tonight feels different. This partnership, what you've built at Chen Technologies, it's exactly the kind of innovation we need. You should be proud, Dr. Chen. I am, she said simply, and I'm looking forward to what we'll accomplish together. Thomas raised his glass. To new beginnings and bold visions. They clinked glasses, the sound crisp and clear above the ambient noise. Around them, other guests had begun to take notice. Phones were discreetly pulled from pockets. Photos were snapped. Maya Chen, the black woman who had just secured one of the biggest deals of the year, was the story everyone would be talking about tomorrow. But not everyone was celebrating. From across the ballroom near the grand staircase that curved like a frozen wave of marble and gold, a pair of cold eyes watched the exchange with barely concealed disdain. Victoria Harrington, Thomas's younger sister by 15 years, stood with a glass of Bordeaux clutched in her perfectly manicured hand. At 57, she had spent her entire life in the shadow of her brother's success, compensating with excessive spending, social climbing, and a fierce protection of what she considered her world. And Dr. Maya Chen was not part of that world. Who does she think she is? Victoria muttered to her companion, Lillian Ashworth, a socialite whose family fortune came from oil and whose opinions came from prejudice. Your brother's new business partner, apparently, Lillian replied with a knowing smirk. I heard she's brilliant. MIT graduate, youngest CEO in her sector. Brilliant, Victoria interrupted with a dismissive wave, is just another word for opportunistic. Look at her standing there like she belongs. This isn't Silicon Valley or some startup convention. This is the Harrington Gala, our gala. There are standards. Lillian's eyebrows rose slightly. What are you going to do? Victoria's lips curved into something that resembled a smile but carried no warmth. Remind her where she stands. She began her descent down the staircase, each step deliberate and theatrical. Her crimson gown, a Valentino original that cost more than most people's cars, flowed behind her like a cape of entitlement. The wine in her glass swirled gently with each movement, the deep red liquid catching the light like liquid rubies. Conversations paused as she passed. Victoria Harrington always commanded attention, though often for the wrong reasons. She had a reputation in these circles, sharp-tongued, petty, and fiercely protective of social hierarchies that the rest of the world had begun to question. Maya noticed her approach but didn't move. She had dealt with Victoria's type before. Every boardroom had at least one person who saw competence as a threat and diversity as an inconvenience. Dr. Chen, Victoria's voice was honeyed poison as she arrived, positioning herself directly in front of Maya with Lillian trailing behind. Or, may I call you Maya? We're practically family now, aren't we? Dr. Chen is fine, Maya replied evenly, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's pale blue ones without flinching. Of course, Victoria continued, taking a slow sip of her wine. How very professional of you. I must say my brother has surprised me with this partnership. He usually prefers working with established firms, companies with history, legacy. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Chen Technologies has been operating for 12 years, Maya said calmly. We've pioneered advances in quantum computing that have revolutionized data security. Our patents alone are valued at over $2 billion. I'd say that qualifies as established. Victoria's smile tightened. Oh, I'm sure you have impressive credentials. Thomas wouldn't have chosen you otherwise. He's always been so... She paused, searching for the word. Progressive in his later years. Always looking to make a statement. A statement, Maya repeated slowly. Well, yes. Victoria leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that several nearby guests could still hear. Diversity is very fashionable right now, isn't it? Everyone wants to show how inclusive they are. How modern. It's quite the trend. Lillian stifled a laugh behind her champagne flute. Maya's expression didn't change. But something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but calculation. She had learned long ago that responding to casual racism with emotion only satisfied the aggressor. Instead, she smiled slightly. Fashion fades, Maya said quietly. Excellence endures. That's why I'm here. The words landed like a slap. Victoria's face flushed slightly, her grip tightening on her wine glass. Excellence, Victoria echoed with a hollow laugh. How inspiring. Tell me, Maya. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, do you find these events intimidating? Being surrounded by so much history, so many families whose names have shaped this country for generations? I find them informative, Maya replied. You learn a lot about people at events like these. Who has substance and who's simply wearing their inheritance like a costume. Lillian gasped softly. Several guests who had been pretending not to listen suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Victoria's face transformed from patronizing sweetness to cold fury in an instant. You should be careful how you speak to people in this room. Not everyone is as tolerant as my brother. Tolerant, Maya repeated, her voice still calm but edged with steel. Interesting word choice. You know what I mean, Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. You walk in here with your degree in your little tech company and you think you've earned a seat at this table. But some of us were born to this. We understand the culture, the traditions, the unspoken rules that people like you will never quite grasp. The ballroom had gone quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the waiters seemed to freeze, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Maya took a small step forward, her voice steady and clear. People like me built the technology that runs your phone, your car, your entire lifestyle. People like me are the reason your brother's company will remain relevant in the next decade. So, when you say, people like me, be very specific about what you mean. Victoria's hand trembled slightly, the wine in her glass catching the light. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. Then, in a movement that seemed to happen in slow motion, she tilted her wrist. The Bordeaux splashed across Maya's shoulder and chest, deep red, staining the midnight blue fabric like blood on water. The liquid dripped onto the Carrara marble with audible drops that echoed in the sudden silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another pulled out their phone immediately. Victoria's voice cut through the shock, dripping with false concern. "Oh, how clumsy of me! I'm so sorry! I didn't see you there! You just blend into the background so well. Easy to miss." The words hung in the air, their meaning crystal clear to everyone present. This wasn't an accident. This was a public humiliation designed to put Maya in her place. Lillian covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. Other guests looked away, embarrassed or complicit or simply too cowardly to intervene. Maya stood perfectly still, wine dripping from her gown, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't wipe at the stain, didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply looked at Victoria with an expression of absolute calm, as if watching a child throw a tantrum. Then slowly, deliberately, Maya reached into her small clutch and pulled out her phone. The room held its breath. The wine continued its slow descent down Maya's gown, each droplet a countdown to something the room couldn't yet comprehend. Victoria stood there, her empty glass still tilted at an angle, her lips curved into a triumphant smirk that said she'd won. Around them, the ballroom had transformed into a theater of whispers and barely concealed shock. Phones were already emerging from pockets and purses, cameras angling for the perfect shot of the humiliated CEO. But Maya Chen wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. She wasn't looking at anyone. Her attention had shifted entirely to the phone in her hand, her thumb moving across the screen with practiced precision. The light from the device cast a soft glow across her face, highlighting features that remained absolutely serene. No tears, no trembling, no visible anger. Just a calm that was somehow more unsettling than any outburst could have been. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked, her voice still carrying that mocking edge, though something in Maya's silence had begun to unnerve her. "Calling for a napkin? Or perhaps you're ordering a new dress. I can recommend some wonderful boutiques that might be more within your range." Maya didn't respond. She simply lifted the phone to her ear, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. The room leaned in collectively, straining to hear. When Maya spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the cathedral-like silence of the ballroom, every syllable carried with perfect clarity. "Jennifer," she said calmly, addressing her chief legal officer, who was apparently waiting for this exact call. "Activate Protocol 7, effective immediately. All provisions, no exceptions, no delays." There was a pause as the person on the other end responded. Maya's expression didn't change. "Yes, I'm certain," she continued, her tone as casual as if she were ordering coffee. "The integrity clause has been violated in the most public way possible. We have multiple witnesses, and, I'm sure, excellent video documentation. Proceed with full termination and initiate the PR response plan. I want the statement live in 4 minutes. Another pause. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What is she doing?" "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be available for the board call in 30 minutes. Maya lowered the phone and looked directly at Victoria for the first time since the wine had been spilled. "You should check your phone in about 3 minutes. Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. "Is that supposed to be a threat? Do you think you can—" "It's not a threat," Maya interrupted softly, slipping her phone back into her clutch. "It's a consequence. There's a difference." The room erupted in confused murmuring. What had just happened? What was Protocol 7? The older guests looked bewildered, but the younger ones, the tech executives, the digital natives, had gone pale. They understood what a 4-minute response time meant in corporate terms. Something massive was about to happen. Thomas Harrington pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Maya, what's going on? What was that phone call?" Before she could answer, the first phone buzzed. Then another. Then a dozen more in rapid succession, creating a symphony of notification sounds that swept through the ballroom like a wave. Guests fumbled for their devices, their faces illuminating in the dim light as they read whatever had just appeared on their screens. "Oh my God," someone breathed. "This can't be real," another whispered. "It's on Bloomberg already," a tech investor announced loudly, his voice cracking with disbelief. Victoria's smirk had vanished. She yanked her phone from her purse with trembling hands. her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen as she pulled up her news feed. The blood drained from her face as she read. Breaking. Chen Technologies terminates 3.5B partnership with Harrington Empire. Chen Technologies issues. Statement: integrity is non-negotiable. Harrington Empire loses historic deal following incident at private gala. The headlines were everywhere. Bloomberg, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, every major financial outlet had published within seconds of each other. The statements were verified, official, and devastating. Maya's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. As you're now reading, Chen Technologies has exercised our right to terminate our partnership with the Harrington Empire under Section 14, Clause 3 of our contract, the Integrity Clause. This clause allows either party to withdraw if the other engages in behavior that fundamentally contradicts our shared values of respect, dignity, and professional conduct. Thomas stared at her in horror. Maya, please, this is a misunderstanding. My sister doesn't speak for... Your sister wore your family name like a weapon tonight, Maya said, her eyes meeting his with something that might have been sympathy. And in doing so, she demonstrated exactly what kind of culture exists within organizations that tolerate such behavior. I'm not terminating this deal because of spilled wine, Mr. Harrington. I'm terminating it because of what that wine represented, a fundamental lack of respect that clearly runs deeper than one person's actions. Victoria found her voice shrill and desperate. You're destroying a $3.5 billion deal because of a joke? Because of an accident? Maya turned to her slowly. Tell me, Ms. Harrington, which part was the joke? The part where you questioned my qualifications? The part where you implied I was a diversity hire? Or the part where you said I blend into the background? Please, help me understand the humor so I can laugh along. Silence. That's what I thought, Maya continued. And no, this isn't about the wine. This is about a pattern of behavior that creates hostile environments, perpetuates discrimination, and ultimately destroys value. Your brother may have been willing to overlook it for the sake of family harmony, but I'm not obligated to do business with people who see me as less than human. Phones continued to buzz. The social media explosion was already underway. Someone had captured the wine spilling on video, and it was spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at viral speed. The Harrington Gala was trending worldwide within minutes. The comments section was erupting with outrage, support, and the kind of rapid-fire discourse that defined modern scandals. A young journalist in the crowd shouted out, Dr. Chen, are you concerned about the financial impact of this decision? Maya smiled faintly. Am I concerned about losing a partner who tolerates racism? No. Chen Technologies will be fine. Our technology speaks for itself. Our values are clear. Companies that align with those values will want to work with us. Those that don't, well, they're free to work with whomever shares their principles. Another voice called out, What do you say to people who think this is an overreaction? I'd say they've never been told they don't belong in a room they earned the right to enter. I'd say they've never had to prove their worth twice as hard for half the recognition. And I'd say that their privilege has protected them from understanding that silence in the face of disrespect isn't peace. It's complicity. The crowd parted as Maya walked toward the stage where a microphone stood near the podium that had been set up for evening announcements. Her wine-stained gown left a faint trail on the marble floor. a visual reminder of what had transpired. She climbed the 3 steps to the platform with steady grace, her heels clicking with authority. Behind her, Victoria stood frozen, her phone still clutched in her hand, watching her brother's empire crumble in real time. The Harrington Empire's stock ticker was already showing movement on trading apps, down 3% in after-hours trading and dropping faster as the news spread. Maya reached the microphone and adjusted it slightly. The sound system amplified the movement, drawing every eye in the room to her. She looked out across the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some shocked, some calculating the political ramifications of which side to support publicly. "I didn't come here tonight expecting to make a speech," she began, her voice resonating through the ballroom with crystal clarity. "I came here to celebrate a partnership, to toast to innovation and progress, and to enjoy what should have been a milestone moment in my company's history. But instead, I was reminded of something important." She paused, letting the silence build. "Power is a funny thing. We often mistake it for wealth, for family names, for access to rooms like this one. But real power isn't about who can hurt you. It's about who you become when someone tries. Real power isn't dominance. It's dignity maintained under pressure. It's the ability to say no to disrespect, regardless of the cost." Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Others shifted uncomfortably. Tonight, someone looked at me and saw an opportunity to remind me of my place, to put me in my lane, as they say. To demonstrate that no matter what I've built, no matter what I've achieved, there will always be people who see my presence as an intrusion rather than an addition. Maya's eyes found Victoria in the crowd. And perhaps, in rooms like this, that person was used to getting away with it, used to people laughing nervously and moving on, used to victims staying silent because the cost of speaking up seemed too high. Her voice grew stronger. "But here's what that person forgot. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by accepting unacceptable behavior. I didn't become a CEO by tolerating disrespect for the sake of comfort. And I certainly didn't fight my way into rooms that weren't designed for me just to be grateful when someone decides to tolerate my existence." The applause started slowly. One person clapping, then 2, then a dozen. Within seconds, half the room was applauding, some standing, others still too stunned or too conflicted to move. "So yes," Maya continued over the applause, "I terminated a $3.5 billion deal tonight, and I'd do it again. Because that deal would have required me to compromise something worth far more than money, my self-respect and the message I send to every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong." The applause grew louder. Charles Harrington, Thomas's oldest son and the COO of Harrington Empire, suddenly pushed his way to the front of the crowd. At 43, he was being groomed to take over the family business, and his face was flushed with panic and anger. "Dr. Chen," he called out, his voice sharp and commanding, "this is absurd. You cannot destroy a multi-billion-dollar partnership over a personal dispute with my aunt. This is business, not a therapy session. There are shareholders to consider, employees who depend on this deal, legal ramifications." "All of which were considered," Maya interrupted calmly. "When your legal team agreed to the integrity clause, they signed it, your father signed it. You signed it, Mr. Harrington. Section 14. Clause 3 gives either party the unilateral right to terminate if the other engages in discriminatory conduct. The threshold for evidence is witness testimony and documented proof. I have both, provided generously by your aunt, and captured beautifully by at least 20 phones in this room." Charles's jaw clenched. You're willing to walk away from billions because your feelings were hurt? No, Maya said, her voice dropping to something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. I'm walking away because doing business with your family would require me to accept that my humanity is negotiable. And it's not. Not for 3.5 billion, not for any amount. She stepped back from the microphone. Her message delivered. The room exploded, some in applause, others in furious whispers, and still others frantically making phone calls to their own companies, reassessing their relationships with the Harrington Empire. Charles stood there, impotent rage written across his features, while his father looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Victoria had disappeared into the crowd, her humiliation complete and public. Maya descended from the stage, and this time, when she walked toward the exit, people moved aside not out of contempt, but out of respect. Some reached out to shake her hand. Others nodded in silent solidarity. A young black woman in her 20s stood near the door, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "Thank you." Maya paused, squeezed her hand gently, and whispered back, "Never let them make you small." Then she walked out into the night, leaving behind a ballroom in chaos and an empire beginning its slow, inevitable collapse. The cool October air hit Maya's face like a baptism as she stepped through the grand doors of the Roosevelt estate. Behind her, the muffled chaos of the ballroom faded into background noise, shouting voices, ringing phones, the desperate scramble of an empire trying to stop its own bleeding. But out here, under the star-scattered sky with the Atlantic Ocean whispering against the rocks below, there was only clarity. Her driver, Marcus, stood beside the black Mercedes S-Class, his face etched with concern as he took in her wine-stained gown. He'd been with her for 7 years, long enough to read her moods, long enough to know when to speak and when to simply open the door. "Dr. Chen," he said softly, his hand on the door handle. "Are you all right?" Maya paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Was she all right? She'd just blown up a $3.5 billion deal, potentially made powerful enemies, and turned what should have been a celebratory evening into a corporate war zone. By traditional measures, she should be devastated. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in months. "I'm better than all right, Marcus," she said, sliding into the leather interior. "I'm free." As the car pulled away from the estate, Maya's phone began its symphony of notifications. Her chief legal officer, Jennifer Wu, had already sent a comprehensive brief. Her communications director, Andre Martinez, had compiled the initial media response. Her board members were requesting an emergency call. But it was the message from her younger sister, Lily, that made her smile. "Just saw the video. Mom always said you had a backbone of steel. Pretty sure the whole internet agrees. Call me when you can. Love you." Maya leaned back against the seat and opened her tablet. The news cycle had exploded with the force of a digital supernova. Every major outlet was running the story, but it was the viral spread on social media that truly captured the magnitude of what had just happened. The video, shot by at least 15 different phones from various angles, had been stitched together by industrious internet users into a complete narrative. The confrontation, the wine, the calm phone call, Maya's speech. It had everything a viral moment needed: a clear villain, an underdog hero, justice served in real time, and a message that resonated across demographics. Maya Chen was trending #1 worldwide. Integrity is not negotiable was #2. Harrington Empire was #3. But for all the wrong reasons. The comments section was a digital riot. She really said respect is non-negotiable and backed it up with 3.5 billion. That's not just talk, that's action. The way she didn't even raise her voice. That's real power. She let her worth speak for itself. Victoria Harrington really thought she could humiliate a woman who built a fortune from scratch. The audacity. This is what happens when you underestimate quiet confidence. She didn't need to shout. She just had to act. But it wasn't just social media. The financial news networks had interrupted their regular programming. CNBC had brought in a panel of experts to discuss the implications. Bloomberg had their top analysts breaking down the contract's integrity clause. The Wall Street Journal's website had crashed briefly from traffic overload. And then there were the numbers. Jennifer's report painted a devastating picture for the Harrington Empire. Within the first hour, their stock had dropped 8% in after-hours trading. By the time Asian markets opened, it had fallen another 6%. The total market capitalization loss was approaching $2.8 billion and climbing. Institutional investors were demanding emergency calls. Retail investors were panic selling. The company's bonds were being downgraded in real time, but it wasn't just the immediate financial impact. The integrity clause termination had triggered a series of contractual dominoes that nobody outside the legal teams had fully appreciated. Chen Technologies had been slated to provide the core infrastructure for 3 major Harrington initiatives: a smart city project in Dubai, a quantum computing research facility in Singapore, and a revolutionary data security system for their financial services division. Without Chen Technologies' proprietary technology, those projects were effectively dead. The Dubai deal alone had promised $8 billion in revenue over 5 years. Singapore represented another $4 billion. The financial services upgrade was worth $2 billion annually. The termination of the partnership hadn't just cost the Harrington Empire $3.5 billion. It had erased an entire future worth potentially $30 billion or more. Maya scrolled through the analyst reports already being published. Harrington Empire's reputation crisis, can they recover? The $3.5 billion glass of wine, a case study in corporate values. When family liability meets fiduciary responsibility, the Harrington dilemma. Andre's communication brief was even more interesting. He'd compiled a statistical breakdown of the public response. 87% of respondents in a rapid Twitter poll supported Maya's decision. Corporate executives were split 60-40 in favor. With the divide largely falling along generational lines, Gen Z and millennial workers were overwhelmingly supportive, with many threatening boycotts of Harrington products. Civil rights organizations had already released statements praising Maya's stance. Business schools were requesting interviews to turn this into a case study. But perhaps most significantly, 6 other companies had already reached out through back channels, expressing interest in partnerships with Chen Technologies. 2 were direct competitors of the Harrington Empire. The message was clear. Maya's stand hadn't just been morally right, it had been strategically brilliant. "Dr. Chen," Marcus's voice came through the intercom. "We're approaching your building. There are reporters outside." Maya looked up to see a cluster of news vans and camera crews stationed outside her Manhattan penthouse. She'd expected as much. "Take me to the office instead," she instructed. "I have calls to make." The Chen Technologies headquarters occupied 15 floors of a gleaming tower in Hudson Yards. Even at 11:47 p.m., the building was blazing with light. Word had spread fast, and her entire executive team had assembled in the main conference room, their faces a mixture of concern, excitement, and disbelief. Jennifer Wu stood as Maya entered, her laptop surrounded by legal documents and energy drink cans. At 42, she was one of the best corporate attorneys in the country, and her expression was pure vindication. That, Jennifer said, pointing at Maya, was the most beautiful contract enforcement I've ever witnessed. I've been practicing law for 18 years, and I have never seen an integrity clause deployed with such perfect timing and devastating effect. Andre Martinez, the communications director, was grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. Dr. Chen, the response is beyond anything we could have engineered. You're not just trending, you're a movement. We've received interview requests from Oprah, 60 Minutes, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and about 50 others. Your speech has been viewed 47 million times in the last 3 hours. 47 million. David Kim, the chief technology officer, leaned forward. But what about the practical implications? We just walked away from our biggest deal. What's the plan? Maya set her clutch down and faced her team. These were the people who had believed in her vision when Chen Technologies was just an idea in a shared office space. They deserved transparency. The plan, she said calmly, is to be exactly who we've always been. We built this company on 2 principles: technological excellence and unwavering integrity. Tonight, I demonstrated that the second principle isn't negotiable, even when the cost is high. Yes, we lost $3.5 billion, but what we gained is something more valuable: absolute clarity about our values. The market is going to test that, said Rachel Foster, the CFO, though her tone was more analytical than critical. Our stock will likely take a hit tomorrow when markets open. Investors will question the decision. We need to be prepared for that conversation. Let them question, Maya replied. Our fundamentals are strong. Our technology is years ahead of the competition. And now the entire world knows that we won't compromise our principles for profit. Do you know how rare that is in today's corporate landscape? Do you know how valuable that brand positioning is? She pulled up a projection on the conference room screen, showing the analysis her team had been working on during her drive. Within 1 hour of the announcement, we received preliminary inquiries from 6 Fortune 500 companies. 2 of them are willing to exceed the Harrington deal terms. 3 others want to discuss partnerships that could be worth significantly more in the long term. And that's just the beginning. By next week, we'll have more opportunities than we can pursue. The room absorbed this information with growing excitement. But more importantly, Maya continued, her voice taking on the quality that had made her a legendary speaker at tech conferences, we sent a message that will resonate for years. Every talented person of color who's been made to feel less than, every woman who's been dismissed in a boardroom, every innovator who's been told they don't belong, they all saw tonight that you don't have to accept disrespect to succeed. You can walk away, you can demand better, and the world will respect you more, not less. Jennifer nodded slowly. The legal ramifications for the Harrington Empire are going to be extensive. That integrity clause is ironclad. They can't sue. They can't claim breach. They signed away that right when they agreed to our terms. And now every company that does business with them is going to review their contracts, looking for similar clauses or adding them. Victoria Harrington didn't just embarrass her family. She created a legal precedent that will haunt them for decades. What about Victoria herself? Andre asked. "What's happening with her?" Maya checked her phone, where a separate thread was tracking the Harrington family's response. "According to my sources, she's been asked to leave the estate. Charles and Thomas are in crisis meetings with their board. The family is fracturing in real time. Several board members are calling for a complete restructuring of their corporate governance policies." "Good," Rachel said simply, and several others nodded in agreement. The emergency board call lasted until 2:30 a.m. Maya faced tough questions from investors, but the board's support was unanimous. They understood that sometimes the right decision and the expensive decision were the same thing. By the time the call ended, they had approved a comprehensive strategy to capitalize on the momentum. By the time Maya finally returned home at 3:47 a.m., the story had evolved beyond a simple business dispute. It had become a cultural touchstone. 3 days later, the financial markets had rendered their verdict. Chen Technologies' stock had initially dipped 4% when markets opened on Monday, but by Tuesday afternoon, it had recovered and was up 12% from pre-incident levels. Apparently, integrity was good for business after all. The Harrington empire was less fortunate. Their stock had plummeted 22% and showed no signs of recovery. 3 major investors had filed shareholder lawsuits demanding accountability. 2 board members had resigned. The Dubai project had been officially canceled, with the government citing concerns about partner reliability. Singapore had quietly opened talks with Chen Technologies directly, but the real damage was reputational. A damning expose in the New York Times revealed that Victoria's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. Over the course of a week, journalists had interviewed dozens of former Harrington employees, business partners, and society figures. A pattern emerged of casual racism, classism, and a toxic culture that had been tolerated for years because the Harrington name carried so much weight. The article titled "The Empire of Entitlement." How the Harrington family's culture of exclusion led to a $3.5 billion collapse went viral. It detailed incidents spanning 2 decades. A black executive who'd been passed over for promotion 7 times, despite stellar performance while less qualified white colleagues advanced. Asian employees who'd been asked where they were really from at company events. Women who'd been subjected to condescending remarks about their capabilities. LGBTQ+ staff members who'd been told to keep it professional, while straight colleagues openly discussed their families. The time Victoria had complained about a hotel having too many immigrants on staff during a business trip, each story, individually, might have been dismissed. Collectively, they painted a portrait of systemic dysfunction. The comment section became a confessional, with more people adding their own experiences. The hashtag #EachHarringtonStories trended for 3 days. Corporate sponsors began quietly distancing themselves. The Harrington name, once a guarantee of prestige, had become toxic. Universities renamed buildings. Charities declined donations. Society pages that had once fawned over the family now published critical analyses. Thomas Harrington issued a public statement apologizing for his sister's behavior and announcing her removal from all family business interests. But it was too little. Too late. The internet doesn't forgive easily, and the video of Victoria pouring wine on Maya had become the symbol of everything people hated about wealthy elites who believed themselves above consequences. Victoria herself had vanished from public life. Her social media accounts were deleted. Her philanthropic board positions were quietly resigned. Rumors circulated that she'd left the country, possibly for a villa in the south of France. but nobody knew for certain. She'd become a cautionary tale, a punchline, a ghost of privilege past. Charles Harrington tried to salvage the company, but the damage ran too deep. Partners who'd worked with the Harrington empire for decades began finding reasons to renegotiate terms or exit contracts early. The empire that had taken 3 generations to build was crumbling under the weight of one evening's arrogance. Meanwhile, Maya's life had transformed in ways both expected and surprising. 6 months later, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, had never been particularly diverse. The annual gathering of global elites was slowly changing, but it remained predominantly white, predominantly male, and predominantly old money. So when Dr. Maya Chen took the stage in the main auditorium, there was a particular electricity in the air. She wore a deep burgundy suit with subtle gold accents, powerful, elegant, and entirely her own aesthetic. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had nothing left to prove. The moderator, a veteran journalist from the BBC, smiled warmly as Maya settled into her chair. The session was titled Values-Based Leadership in the Modern Economy, but everyone knew it was really about one thing: the night that changed everything. Dr. Chen, the moderator began, 6 months ago, you made a decision that shocked the business world. You walked away from a $3.5 billion deal because of a personal insult. Some called it brave. Others called it reckless. Looking back now, how do you view that decision? Maya smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been asked this question 100 times and would answer it 100 more. I view it as inevitable, she said simply. People often focus on that single moment, the whine, the phone call, the termination. But that moment was the culmination of thousands of smaller moments throughout my career. Every time I stayed silent when someone questioned my credentials. Every time I smiled politely through microaggressions. Every time I made myself smaller to make others comfortable. All of those moments were building to that one where I finally said, no more. The audience, typically reserved, erupted in applause. But to address the question directly, Maya continued once the applause faded, it wasn't reckless. It was calculated. I knew exactly what I was risking, and I knew exactly what I would gain. And I don't mean financially, although it's worth noting that Chen Technologies has grown by 340% since that night. What I gained was something more fundamental: self-respect and the respect of the people whose opinions actually matter. The quote that went viral, the moderator said, pulling it up on the screen behind them. Real power isn't about who can hurt you. It's about who you become when someone tries. Did you plan that line, or was it spontaneous? Maya laughed, a genuine sound that humanized the almost mythical figure she'd become. Entirely spontaneous. I think the best truths usually are. You can't script authenticity. Let's talk about the aftermath, the moderator pressed. The Harrington empire has lost over 40% of its market value. Some say you destroyed a 100-year-old company over a personal slight. How do you respond to that? Maya's expression sobered. I respond by correcting the premise. I didn't destroy the Harrington empire. Their culture destroyed the Harrington empire. I simply refuse to enable it anymore. There's a difference between causing harm and refusing to participate in a harmful system. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on an edge that commanded attention. For 100 years, the Harrington empire operated in a world where people like Victoria could pour wine on people like me with impunity, where racism and classism were just the price of entry into elite spaces, where victims stayed silent because speaking up cost too much. That system was always unsustainable. I just accelerated its collapse. But what about the employees? Someone from the audience called out. Thousands of people lost jobs when Harrington's subsidiaries downsized. Maya didn't flinch from the question. You're right. And I think about them often. But I'd ask you to consider this. What message does it send if we preserve toxic companies just because they employ people? Aren't we then saying that employment justifies any behavior? That we should tolerate discrimination, harassment, and abuse if the alternative is economic disruption? She paused, letting the question hang. The better question is, why did the Harrington Empire put those employees in that position? Why did they build their entire business model around a culture that was bound to fail eventually? Those employees deserved better leadership, and many of them have found it. Chen Technologies has hired 847 former Harrington employees in the last 6 months, so have dozens of other companies that saw an opportunity to recruit talented people from a sinking ship. The moderator smiled. Speaking of Chen Technologies, your company has become one of the most sought-after employers in the tech sector. Applications have increased by 600%. You've been called a role model, a disruptor, and a cultural icon. How do you handle that pressure? By remembering that I'm not a hero, Maya said firmly. I'm a CEO who made a business decision based on my company's stated values. The fact that this is considered remarkable says more about how broken our corporate norms are than it does about me. In a healthy business ecosystem, walking away from discriminatory partners should be unremarkable. It should be standard practice. But it's not, the moderator observed. No, it's not. And that's the real problem we need to solve. The conversation continued for another 40 minutes, ranging from leadership philosophy to the future of corporate governance to the role of technology in creating more equitable systems. But it was the final question that produced the moment everyone would remember. Dr. Chen, a young woman, stood in the audience, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I'm a first-generation college student from Nigeria. I'm studying computer science, and I want to start my own company someday. But I'm terrified of rooms like the one you walked into that night. Rooms where people will judge me before I even speak. What advice do you have for people like me? Maya stood and walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the young woman. First, feel that fear. Don't try to suppress it or pretend it doesn't exist. That fear is rational. You're walking into systems that weren't designed for you, that may actively resist you. Acknowledge that. The audience was completely silent now. Second, know your worth independent of their validation. Build something so excellent, so undeniable, that your work speaks before you enter the room. That's what I did. By the time I walked into that gala, my technology had already proven itself. Victoria's insult couldn't diminish that. Maya's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Third, find your line. Decide in advance what you will and won't tolerate. Not in the heat of the moment, but in quiet reflection. Know what your non-negotiables are, because when the moment comes, and it will come, you won't have time to think. You'll only have time to act on the principles you've already established. She paused, her eyes still locked on the young woman. And finally, remember this: they need you more than you need them. That's the secret they don't want you to know. The future belongs to innovators, to people who see problems differently, to those who bring perspectives that homogeneous rooms lack. You are not asking for permission to succeed. You are offering them the opportunity to be part of your success. And if they can't see that, walk away. There will be others who can. The young woman was crying now, as were several others in the audience. The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained. 1 year later, Time magazine's Person of the Year issue featured Maya Chen on the cover with a simple headline, "The Power of No." The article inside chronicled not just that one evening, but the ripple effects that had transformed corporate America. Hundreds of companies had added or strengthened integrity clauses in their contracts. Diversity and inclusion initiatives, often dismissed as performative, were being given teeth and accountability. Boards were scrutinizing family members and executives for behavior that might create liability. Business schools were teaching the Chen doctrine as a case study in values-based leadership. The quote that had gone viral that night, "Real power isn't about who can hurt you. It's about who you become when someone tries," had been printed on T-shirts, emblazoned on murals, quoted in graduation speeches, and even tattooed on the arms of people who'd found inspiration in her stand. Chen Technologies had become the 5th most valuable tech company in the world, with a market cap of $180 billion. They'd expanded into 12 new markets, acquired 3 promising startups, and pioneered advances in quantum encryption that were reshaping digital security. But perhaps more importantly, they'd maintained a company culture that people actually wanted to work in, with employee satisfaction ratings that were the envy of the industry. Maya herself had been offered cabinet positions, board seats at the world's most prestigious organizations, and speaking fees that would have made her wealthy on that alone. She'd accepted some and declined others, always guided by a simple question. Does this align with my values? The Harrington Empire still existed, but barely. They'd been forced to sell off major divisions to cover debts and settlements. The family name, once synonymous with American business royalty, was now a cautionary tale taught in business ethics courses. Charles had stepped down as COO. Thomas had retired, his legacy forever tarnished by that one evening he couldn't control. The company continued, but as a shadow of its former self. Victoria had never returned to public life. Occasional sightings placed her in various European locations, always alone, always avoiding cameras. She'd become a symbol, a ghost story that parents in business circles told their children. This is what happens when you mistake privilege for power. On a cool October evening, exactly 1 year after the incident, Maya stood in her office overlooking Manhattan. The city sparkled below her, a constellation of ambition and possibility. Her assistant had left for the evening. The building was quiet. She held a glass of wine, read, ironically, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Watching your TED Talk from last month. You know what I love? You didn't just win. You changed the game. Proud of you, sis." Maya smiled and looked at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. The woman looking back had gray strands threading through her locks now, the price of building an empire while revolutionizing an industry. But her eyes held something that hadn't been there a year ago. Peace. She thought about that young woman in Davos, the one who'd asked for advice. Maya had received hundreds of messages from her since, updating her on her progress, asking questions, building her own company. She was going to be extraordinary. So were thousands of others who'd been inspired to demand more, to expect better, to walk away from situations that diminish them. That was the real legacy. Not the money or the accolades or the magazine covers. It was the permission she'd given to others to value themselves enough to say no. Maya raised her glass to her reflection, to the journey, to the cost and the rewards of standing firm. To integrity, she whispered to the empty office. May it always be non-negotiable. The city lights twinkled in response. A million stories unfolding in the darkness, each one a choice between comfort and conviction, between acceptance and authenticity. Maya Chen had made her choice, and in doing so, she'd reminded the world that true power doesn't demand respect. It commands it by simply refusing to accept anything less. The glass of wine Victoria had poured that night had cost her family billions. But it had bought something more valuable than any contract could provide, proof that dignity, once claimed and defended, could never truly be taken away. And that, Maya thought as she turned from the window, was worth every dollar she'd walked away from. 5 years later, the Harvard Business School auditorium was packed with future leaders. Young minds eager to understand how to navigate the complex intersection of profit and principle. Maya stood at the podium, older now at 41, but carrying her years with the grace of someone who'd earned every line and every gray hair. A student raised his hand. Dr. Chen, if you could go back to that night, would you do anything differently? Maya considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Behind her, a slide showed the now famous image of her standing calmly with wine dripping down her gown, phone in hand, completely composed. I would have worn a different dress, she said with a slight smile, and the audience laughed. That one never quite recovered. The laughter faded, and her expression grew thoughtful. But in all seriousness, no. I wouldn't change a thing. Because that night taught me, and hopefully taught others, the most important lesson in business and in life. Your values are only real if they cost you something. If your principles are only maintained when convenient, they're not principles, they're preferences. She clicked to the next slide, showing Chen Technologies' current valuation, their employee satisfaction scores, their innovation patents, their social impact metrics. Every decision has a price. That night I paid $3.5 billion for my self-respect, and I got back something worth far more. A company built on genuine values. A team that trusts my leadership and the ability to look at myself in the mirror without compromise. In the end, that's not a cost. That's an investment. Another hand raised. What would you say to people who think you got lucky? That most people can't afford to walk away from billions? Maya nodded, appreciating the challenge in the question. I'd say 2 things. First, I didn't get lucky. I got prepared. I built a company with strong fundamentals, diversified partnerships, and proprietary technology that couldn't be easily replaced. That preparation gave me the freedom to walk away. Second, the question isn't whether you can afford to walk away. It's whether you can afford to stay. What's the cost of compromising your values? What's the price of accepting disrespect? What's the long-term damage to your soul, your reputation, your self-worth? She paused, her voice taking on the quality that had made her one of the most sought-after speakers in the world. I've watched the Harrington Empire spend the last 5 years trying to rebuild a reputation they destroyed in one evening. I've seen Victoria Harrington become a cautionary tale, I've witnessed dozens of other companies make similar mistakes because they thought money was more important than dignity. And I can tell you with certainty, the most expensive decision you'll ever make is the one where you sell your integrity. Because unlike stocks, you can't buy it back. The applause was immediate and sustained. As Maya left the auditorium, surrounded by students asking for photos and autographs, she felt that familiar sense of purpose. This was why she kept accepting speaking invitations, even when her schedule was impossible. This was why she kept telling the story, even though she'd told it 1,000 times. Because somewhere in that audience was another young woman or man who would face their own Victoria Harrington, who would stand at their own crossroads between convenience and conviction. And they would remember this story. They would remember that someone walked away from billions and emerged stronger. They would remember that power isn't given, it's claimed. And most importantly, they would remember that respect is not negotiable. Never was. Never will be. Here's what I want to know. What's the one room you're afraid to walk into? What's the one conversation you've been avoiding? What's your wine on the dress moment that's coming? Drop it in the comments, because naming it is the first step to facing it. And if this story lit something in you, subscribe. We're creating a movement of people who know their worth and aren't afraid to defend it.